Yeah, I clicked it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for joining. More people will be joining right now. Please, you can start the session, sir. And thank you
for
so
hosting.
much for listening to us, sir.
How many students have joined?
Currently 7, and slowly they will be joining, sir. You can click on admit all. In participants list, admit all, you have to click, sir.
Yeah, I have to admit them or they will automatically get admitted?
No, sir, you have to admit them, sir. Sir, I'll be admitting them in between. You can start, sir.
Yeah, I'm a starter. Please admit them. Yeah. So, dear students, a very good evening. Today's topic is a common topic, but frequently we get MCQs and questions here and there from this tricky topic. It is a bit tricky. At the same time, it is important. And I have tried to cover all the aspects so that no matter which exam you are appearing, you are able to attempt the question in a correct way. So, shoulder examination and its related pathologies. I am myself Dr. Parminder Singh Kular. I am MS Orthopedics with more than 10 years of experience in my field of orthopedics. So we will try to cover all the aspects including anatomy, clinical condition, clinical examination, radiological examination, the anatomical variants from the MCQ point of view, and the common treatment procedures which are being followed in relation to shoulder. So this is the basic anatomy of the shoulder. It is a ball and socket joint between the glenoid and the humerus, head of the humerus. The head of the humerus is a little bigger in relation to the glenoid. So what makes this the things, it makes the shoulder a slightly unstable joint, and at the same time it is a very mobile joint. We get a great range of movement at the shoulder. So when the joint is unstable, it has to be strongly supported by the ligaments and the muscles around it. So what are the ligaments and the muscles around it? The glenoid cavity is made slightly deeper by the presence of the glenoid labrum at the margin of the glenoid cavity, and there is one tendon originating within the shoulder joint. It is the tendon of the biceps, which originates from the supraglenoid tubercle, and we have ligaments around the shoulder joint which are between the coracoid and the acromion, which are the coracoacromial ligaments. Then we have the ligaments between the coracoid process and the clavicle, which are the trapezoid ligament, which are the coracoclavicular ligament having two parts, the conoid and the trapezoid. Then there are ligaments between the glenoid humerus and the glenoid and the humerus, which are the glenohumeral ligaments, which are superior, middle, and inferior glenohumeral ligaments. So all these ligaments really, they make the structure, the shoulder joint, quite stable on the superior side. At the same time, where it is weak, it is weaker on the anterior and the inferior side. So this will be the sides of the dislocations of the shoulder joint. And on the stable side, superiorly, it will be quite stable, but another problem will arise due to the close packing of the structures, that is the impingement problems. So we will find the impingement problems superiorly and the dislocations inferiorly, and also the instabilities inferiorly. So proceeding from the basic anatomy, slowly we will come outside the shoulder joint. Immediately outside the bones, there is the capsule of the shoulder joint, and capsule is strengthened by the ligaments I've already discussed with you, and surrounding the ligaments we need for the movement the muscles. So what are the muscles immediately around the shoulder joint? They are the rotator cuff muscles, mainly supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and the subscapularis. Why we call them the rotator cuff muscles? Because they spread out like a cuff when they come near their attachment at the proximal end of the humerus. So you see anteriorly we have subscapularis, superiorly we have the supraspinatus, posteriorly we have the infraspinatus, and the teres minor, which originate from the scapula. So from the position of the muscles, as the muscles are a contractile structure, When the posterior muscles contract, they will rotate the humerus externally. When the anterior muscle, which is the subscapularis, it will contract, it will rotate the shoulder into internal rotation, and the superior muscle, the supraspinatus, it will help in the abduction of the shoulder. So if you watch at this diagram, you will see the supraspinatus, it is crossing underneath this acromion process. So here are the impingement problems which usually occur, and it is also in relation to the joint between the coracoid process and the clavicle, the acromion and the clavicle, the acromioclavicular joint. So any osteophytes over there can tear the rotator cuff, and in fact the supraspinatus is the commonest muscle which is prone to tear in the shoulder joint. If we look on the interior side of the bone, scapular bone, we see the origin of the subscapularis, and on the medial border on the interior side, it is the serratus interior muscle which helps in the protraction of the scapula. When the serratus interior contracts, it brings the scapula into protracted position. This is the commonest muscle which you will find developed in the boxers. So it is also called the boxer's muscle. And when it is paralyzed, it leads to the winging of the scapula. It is supplied by the long thoracic nerve of Bell. And on the superior side, we find the omohyoid, and on the coracoid process, you find the insertion of the pectoralis minor, the coracobrachialis, and the short head of the biceps. And the long head of the biceps, I've already told you, it originates from the supraglenoid tubercle, which is, and the triceps originates from the inferior margin of the glenoid. On the back, it is already above the spine of the scapula. We have the supraspinatus. Below it, we have the infraspinatus. Here is the teres minor, and here where the cursor is, here is the teres major. We will come into little. So surrounding these muscles, we have the bigger muscles, which are the teres major, the pectoralis major, the latissimus dorsi, which are the stronger muscles. Latissimus dorsi is the unique muscle which is very helpful in the climbing. Those who do mountain climbing, etc., they have very well built this latissimus dorsi muscle. It gives a triangular shape to the back. So when you exercise in the gym, when you pull down, you are in fact working with this muscle. When you climb a rod, chin up the rod, this is the main muscle which helps you. So
cuff muscles of the shoulder.
So this
the
is a
rotator
brief
cuff
anatomy
muscles
review.
are a group of muscles that form a musculotendinous cuff which provides strength, support, and stability to the capsule of the shoulder joint. It consists of four muscles: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and the subscapularis. The four rotator cuff muscles support the anterior, superior, and posterior aspects of the joint, leaving the inferior part of the joint the weakest. Hence, an inferior dislocation of the shoulder joint is most common.
So we have already covered these
Supraspinatus.
points.
It originates at the medial two-thirds of the supraspinous fossa
more
of
clear,
the
I have given you a
scapula.
video presentation,
It
and also
passes
for those who
laterally
have joined
beneath the
late.
coracoacromial arch and inserts into the upper part of the greater tubercle of the humerus. Its actions are: it initiates the first 15 to 30 degrees of abduction
So this is important.
and helps
It helps in the
stabilize the
initiation
shoulder
of the
joint.
abduction.
Nerve supply is by the suprascapular nerve.
Nerve supply is again
An important point
It
to
is
be
the
noted here
suprascapular
is
nerve.
that it is the most commonly torn muscle of the rotator.
So we go to the next slide. We go to the next slide. This is the common brief screening for the movements of the shoulder. This is the Apley scratch test, which is commonly known. We just make the patient move his arms like this. This is full external rotation on the first slide. This is the full internal rotation, and these are the range of the movements: forward flexion, extension. All these are the important common movements around the shoulder. So scapula, it is not only the movement at the glenohumeral joint, it is also the movement of the scapula around the chest wall, which helps in the building the full range of the movements at the shoulder joint. If the scapula does not move, the movements of the shoulder are restricted. If the glenohumeral joint movements are restricted, patient is able to compensate or do some tricky movements of the shoulder by moving his scapula, but he will commonly present to you with the pain because the scapula is not usually meant for independent range of movement. It is the glenohumeral joint should be free for the shoulder to have a full painless range of movement. So coming to the next slide, this is the brief anatomy of these biceps. It originates by two tendons, long head from the supraglenoid tubercle inside the joint and the short head from the coracoid process with coracobrachialis and pectoralis major. Long head is the seat of the degeneration most of the time. So bicipital tendinitis is again an important pathology of the shoulder joint. So what are the tests to detect the biceps pathologies?
Going to try to do is she's going to start in pronation, but she's going to try to resist supination, and I'll be the resisting force. So go ahead and try to resist me. Now what's happening here is she's activating the biceps via supination, again creating tension on the distal biceps tendon, the biceps belly, as well as the long head of the bicep.
So
Yergason's test is
he's trying to perform the Yergason test by performing external rotation or supination against resistance, which helps in identifying the biceps pathologies. So next, coming to the next slide, it is the speed test. The patient's arm is in full supination and she is trying to do flexion at the shoulder against resistance. If there is tendinitis of the biceps or some tear in the glenoid labrum, which is the slap tear, when the patient tries to flex the shoulder against the resistance provided by the examiner, when the patient tries to perform the movement against resistance, there is pain in the region of the shoulder joint. So coming to the next slide, it is the O'Brien test. It is the test.
This is a test to determine if there's
acromioclavicular joint point, slightly different from the Yergason test. The patient starts with a 90-degree of shoulder flexion, slight adduction with the elbow extended.
Ask the patient to resist this position. If this is painful, I'll ask the patient to.
So first he is trying to do flexion at the shoulder in the supinated position or the internal rotated position at the shoulder, and then in supination. If there is pain on pronation, this helps in identifying the slap tears, or it can be also positive in acromioclavicular joint pathologies. So what are the tests for the impingement? This is an important test for impingement. It is the Neves test. Patient flexed. We have to passively flex the shoulder with arm internally rotated. If there is impingement, there will be pain. The important trick is we have to keep the arm internally rotated and we have to give some support at the scapula. Students, can you hear me? Is everything clear?
Yes, sir, it's clear and crisp.
Yeah.
Everybody can hear.
So this is the Neves test. Then we come to the next. It is the Hawkins test. So how it is different? It is again a test for impingement. How it is different from the Hawkins test? Here the elbow is flexed and the shoulder is slightly abducted and the forearm is pronated, and with the other hand the lower arm just above the elbow is supported, and we try to move the arm into internal rotation, and if there is impingement it will give rise to pain. So this is the Hawkins test. So what we have covered, Hawkins and the Neves test, they are the two tests for the impingement, and the Yergason test and the speed test, they are the two tests for detecting the bicep pathologies and the slap tears. So coming to the next slide, it is the test for detecting the tear in the rotator cuff. Because the supraspinatus is commonly torn, we call it a test for the supraspinatus tear. It is commonly known as the empty can test because the forearm is fully pronated and the arm is internally rotated, we ask the patient to flex, abduct, and pronate, and then ask him to do against the distance. So this is the empty can test for the tear in the supraspinatus. This is the test for instability. It is the Jobs relocation test. If we try to abduct the shoulder and at the same time externally rotate it as in the left side figure, if we don't give a support, the patient will, if we don't give the support, the shoulder will be slightly painful because it will try to dislocate from the glenoid. So when we give the support, the patient will feel comfortable. So this is the Jobs relocation test. And on the right side, what you see, it is the apprehension test. Apprehension test, patient will be apprehensive because if I reproduce this position, my shoulder will give way and it will lead to dislocation. So it is basically a avoidance test. This is a very good clinical examination recently in one of the videos by Dr. Milind Pimprekar. So he is using a mobile application to record the movement of the shoulder. It is very interesting. Here he is demonstrating the total internal and external rotation and 90 degree of abduction of the shoulder. To test this movement, it is the supine position of the patient is a comfortable position to test this movement. So if we go to next, he is testing the Apres track test we have already covered to test the range of internal rotation. This is the movements demonstrated, range of movements. So this is the full can test and the empty can test for the supraspinatus. This is the external rotation, leg test or apprehension or the Jobs relocation test based on this only.
When the patient cannot do abduction and external rotation,
Beer hug test is for supra
the patient sits on a couch, the examiner's hand goes onto the shoulder.
This is the Hopkins test.
With the other
We've
hand,
already
the examiner's
discussed.
internal is a total ROM, which is sum of.
So in fact, we have covered in fact all the important tests for the movements of the shoulder. So then we come to what are the common injuries in the throwing athletes, where we will get shoulder patients. We will get shoulder patients in cricket throwers, volleyball players. So when the shoulder is used for these activities, sporting activities, a lot of stress is generated in the rotator cuff, which may give way even in young patients. You see, there are 5 phases. The wind-up phase, when the person builds up the energy, then the early cocking, late cocking, acceleration, and suddenly he releases the ball. Again, the shoulder comes to an abrupt stop, and these can lead to the pathologies in the rotator cuff and sometimes even slap tears. So what are the injuries in the throwing athletes? These are the tears in the glenoid labrum, tears in the biceps, slap tears. These all things we will see in the throwing athletes. So what are the throwing athletes? The cricket players, the volleyball players, the javelin throwers. So then we come to what are the lesions which we will see, what we will look for. Bennett's lesion, it is also called a thrower's exostosis. It refers to the mineralization of the posterior band of the inferior glenohumeral ligament. So now I will be going from one slide to next. You bit be careful because these things are commonly asked in the MCQ. What is a Bennett lesion? It is a thrower's exostosis, mineralization in the posterior band of the inferior glenohumeral ligament. Then tears in the rotator cuff. The supraspinatus is the commonest muscle to be torn, followed by the infraspinatus. So this is sometimes asked, which is the commonest muscle torn in tears. It is the supraspinatus, but others are not immune to tear. We also find tears in the subscapularis. So other common is impingements. Infraspinatus can get caught in between the glenoid and the humerus. So these are the impingements. This is again a rotator cuff tears. Then here is a pathology of the acromioclavicular joint, the osteoarthritis of the acromioclavicular joint. It again can become painful because the rotator cuff supraspinatus crosses underneath it, and it can even cause tears and inflammation in the supraspinatus per se. causing pain. Then if we find a tear in the rotator cuff, the next thing is, can we repair it? Should we repair it? Will our repair be successful? So this is decided by how much is the fatty infiltration in the muscles. It is not an undergraduate level question, but still I've included it because these days we are getting all sorts of questions. So you don't have to look back anywhere elsewhere to cover the shoulder rotator. This is the Gottlieb classification. You just remember the name. You need not go into the detail. It is based on MRI based classification to know the fatty infiltration of the muscle. That's all. How are the rotator cuff tears repair done? It is done arthroscopically these days. We have the suture anchors. We have which fix into the bone. Anchor is attached, and we repair it using arthroscopic instruments. The important is bone is freshened to help in reattachment of the tendon. So what are then we come to the dislocation. These are usually pathological. First location is nearly always due to trauma, maybe a fall on the outstretched hands. Swoosh injuries, FOOSH, fall on the outstretched hand. So along with the dislocation, we can also encounter fractures. So we should look for the fractures commonly in the greater tuberosity, which can accompany the dislocation. But these may or may not reduce back when the shoulder is put back into position, may need fixation, or sometimes if the reduction is good, we can go for conservative treatment. What we need to do when a patient of trauma comes, we need to get an X-ray done. So on the X-ray, we will find the glenoid cavity and an outline of the head of the humerus. They are overlapping each other, which normally should not be. So this is the case of the dislocation of the shoulder. X-ray is usually sufficient for the treatment purpose initially. Light bulb sign, sometimes asked in MCQ. It is commonly seen in posterior dislocation of the shoulder. It is diagnostic of the posterior dislocation of the shoulder. Why it looks like a bulb? Because the humerus is in 90 degree of external rotation. Another light bulb sign sometimes asked in liver hemangioma. You better remember where you find the light bulb signs. Then what are the pathologies? When the dislocation, after 6 weeks of conservative treatment on activities, patient again comes back to you after 6 months with a redislocation. So dislocations are usually accompanied by tears in the glenoid labrum. This lesion is commonly called the Bincard's lesion, and it is usually found at 3 to 6 o'clock position. The glenoid 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. The Bincard's lesion is a lesion between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock position. So what can be the other lesions in around the shoulder in dislocations or instabilities? It can be a slap lesion, where the biceps pulls over the glenoid labrum, because biceps attaches to the supraglenotubercle and blends with the glenoid labrum. So when a lot of pulls over the biceps and release in sports injuries, it can peel off the glenoid at between 10 and 2 o'clock position. This lesion is called a slap lesion. The test for it is the Yergason test, and anatomical variants in the shoulder. We have two openings in the capsule of the shoulder. One is the foramen of bead bracket between the superior and the superior and the middle glenohumeral ligament, and foramen of Frogier between the middle and the inferior glenohumeral ligament. These are the normal foramina which are seen in the shoulder. These should not be mistaken for any pathologies. Then is the Buford's complex. Sometimes the glenoid labrum is deficient between 1 and 3 o'clock position. It is a Buford complex. It is a glenoid labral variant present in 1.5% of the population. So we should be careful of these from MCQ point of view, and for our orthopedicians from the treatment point of view, and for the radiologists. They should not be wrongly labeled as pathologies. Another is a sublabral foramina. It's again an anatomical variation. Then what is the bony Bincard lesion? When the avulsion of the glenoid labrum has also taken away a piece of bone, it is called as the bony Bincard lesion. It is a fracture of the anterior inferior glenoid. Higher risk of failure of arthroscopic treatment if this lesion is not addressed properly. We have to first assess how much is the bony loss, and this is usually done with the PICOS method. This again is a postgraduate level question. The PICOS method is used to assess how much the bone loss. We draw a circle, and from the circle we assess the bone loss. So you just remember the name, because sometimes don't know how examiner may include the question of what is PICOS method. It is a radiological method to assess the bone. So these are the common ligaments around the shoulder: superior, middle, inferior glenohumeral ligaments, the bicipital tendon, and there is a lesion called the Hegel lesion. Commonly we call it the Hegel lesion. It is the humeral avulsion of the glenohumeral ligament. It is a humeral avulsion of the glenohumeral ligament. Again, it has to be addressed properly if we need to prevent the redislocation. So we call it the Hegel lesion. So what else? Our list is not complete yet. Another lesion is the Glad lesion. It is the glenoid labral articular defect. The glenoid labrum also has pulled away a piece of the cartilage on the articular side of the glenoid, and this lesion is called the Glad lesion. Another lesion is the Alpsa lesion, commonly called the Alpsa lesion. So what it is interior labral perosteal sleeve avulsion. The perosteum has stripped away from the scapula on the interior side. And the last is the Perthes lesion. A piece of the bone has been avulsed from the rim of the glenoid, but it is still attached to the capsule. And the lesions on the humeral side, it is the Hill-Sachs lesion. It is a bony defect in the posterior inferior portion of the head of the humerus in cases of recurrent dislocations. So when the head again and again shoulder dislocates, the humerus is also bone and the glenoid is also bone. And when a bone strikes with the bone, it can either erode the glenoid or create a defect in the posterior inferior portion of the head of the humerus. Because head of the humerus is a cancellous bone, it is quite soft and it can depress. This is the reverse Hill-Sachs lesion, McLaulin's lesion. So again, important from MCQ point of view, McLaughlin lesion. It is again the reverse of the Hill-Sachs lesion. It is the reverse Hill-Sachs lesion. It is important to identify this lesion and correct it to prevent the avascular necrosis, because blood supply will be compromised. And one lesion of the shoulder, Hatchet lesion. Where will you see it? It is refers to the limited erosion of the lateral aspect of the humerus head. This finding is typically associated with ankylosing spondylitis. So question can be asked from the ankylosing spondylitis side or from the shoulder side from the Hatchet lesion. So this is again a point for 2-3 MCQs. Hatchet lesion. Remember, it is seen in ankylosing spondylitis only, and only ankylosing spondylitis. Common lesion of the shoulder, frozen shoulder. This is just a restriction of the movement of the shoulder due to inflammatory adhesions in the capsule of the shoulder joint. It has 3 stages: the freezing, frozen, and the thawing stage. So what is to be done? We have to restore back or prevent the shoulder from decreasing the range of movement. We have to give the patient stretching exercises. It can be with the help of a door, or it can be spine position with the using the other hand. One thing I would like to point out, frozen shoulder is commonly seen in diabetics and after even some hand injuries. We have seen cases of patients of frozen shoulder after colossus fracture. This again is a postgraduate level question. Heidelberg classification. Where it is used for the lesions, fractures of the scapula. Only you need to just remember the name. Heidelberg classification, it is used for the fractures of the scapula, particularly when it is involving the glenoid. Then Hughes classification, it is for the fractures of the proximal humerus. The fractures can be 1 part, 2 part, 3 part, 4 part. Then another classification, acromioclavicular joint injuries and clavicle fractures. For clavicle, we have the common classification, the Allman's classification, and for the Rockwood classification for the acromioclavicular joint injuries. You just remember this is Rockwood. So radiographic views of the shoulder. One is the striker's view. See, it is done in spine position, how the X-ray machine is directed. Then is the West point view. This is for detecting the lesions of the glenoid, for glenoid bone loss, assessing the glenoid bone loss. This is how it is done. West point view, Stryker's view, and this is the Grush's view, the AP view of the shoulder. Because shoulder and scapula, they are slight, the humerus is slightly, head of the humerus is retroverted with respect to the shaft. So we have to incline the beam accordingly to get a true AP view of the shoulder. This is how it is taken to assess the reduction in the joint space or the formation of the osteophytes, basically done for glenohumeral arthritis, degenerative arthritis. Then we come.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. We have just 5 minutes left.
Okay, I will wind up. Associated nerve injuries, brachial plexus injuries. You all know about the brachial plexus, the roots, trunks, and the divisions, and the common lesions from where the nerves originate. You have to memorize these branches of the posterior cord. I would like to stress it is commonly remembered with the mnemonic stars. Then we have the Klumpke's palsies and the Erb's palsy. Klumpke's upper roots and Erb's is of the lower roots. And this is how the hand look at. And the region nerve which is commonly injured around the shoulder, it is the axillary nerve. Then suprascapular nerve, where it crosses the spinoglenoid notch underneath the this transverse scapular ligament. It is prone to compression. It will lead to palsy of the supraspinatus and infraspinatus. Here is the Judith's approach for the scapula. It is interneural approach between the infraspinatus and the here. And these are the positions of the shoulder which are used for surgery of the shoulder. Some surgeons prefer to do in the lateral, and some surgeons prefer to do in the beach chair position. These are the movements for the reduction of the shoulder. This is the common Hawkins maneuver. We rotate the shoulder externally. The trick is we stretch the subscapularis tendon, and on stretching and against it using the leverage, we reduce the shoulder. And this is the lesion of the how the Burkhardt lesion is repaired using arthroscopically. Small video how it is repaired. So lasso is passed.
The shuttling device, leaving the monofilament suture tails exiting from the operative cannula. Pass approximately 4 inches of one limb of the ultrabraid suture through the loop end. Shuttle the suture through the tissue by pulling the monofilament tails away from the working cannula. Once the suture limb has been retrieved outside the cannula, discard the monofilament. Using a grasper, retrieve the other ultrabraid suture limb from the non-operative cannula and move it out the working cannula. Clamp with a hemostat to prevent slippage.
To give an idea how it is, arthroscopic repair is done through the cannulas. Then coming to the next slide, these are the instruments which we use for arthroscopy.
Such as bones,
we have the light source, we have the arthroscope, we have certain instruments, these are the cannulas.
The treatment may stop here, and the surgical
and these are the instruments to pass the sutures and to tie the knots. And this is what are the common procedures performed in recurrent dislocation. One is the Burkhardt repair and the other is the Latarjet procedure. Here the coracoid process is osteotomized and it is attached to the interior rim of the glenoid. It covers the bone defect and prevents the redislocation of the shoulder. This is a procedure which is done when the patient is very demanding. He says he wants to do wrestling after the surgery. So we can straight away go with the Latarjet procedure, or it can be done in neglected dislocations and the neglected recurrent dislocations when the shoulder is dislocating, or in failed Burkhardts. So thank you. Slides are finished.
Thank you so much, sir, for the nice interactive session, and the slides were very impressive as well as the video lectures in between. Thank you so much, sir. Now I will unmute everyone. Let's see if anyone is having doubt. Unmuted everyone. If anyone is having doubt, can ask to sir. Give feedback also.
Yes, anybody would like to ask any questions? I don't think anybody will be able to frame a question related to the shoulder out of these for undergraduates. Anybody would like to ask some questions?
I think, sir, no one is having doubt. Okay, sir. Sir, I'll be uploading your videos as well as the notes you have given. I'll be uploading in M4PG store.
Okay.
Everyone can download from here, and it is free. You can download from here. And if any doubt can ask to sir. Sir is also in M4PG Telegram group. Sir will be happy to answer you all, and feel to answer it. I think Gopal Krishna is having doubt. No, he's giving feedback. Okay, and the next class is we are having oncology class. That is on, I guess, let me check out, on 12th of May, and the topic is carcinoma of cervix and its management. So we are ending, and